We are really, really delighted and pleased to have John King joining us this evening. He is the president and CEO of the Education Trust. But I'm sure, as many of you know, he is the former Secretary of Education under President Obama. Before that, he has done almost everything there is to do in education. He has been a middle school principal. He has been a high school social studies teacher. He has served as Commissioner of Education in the state of New York. And I think probably most importantly, and I'll let him share or not share, he's had his own journey through education. Times when the school system worked beautifully for him and times when it absolutely did not. And I think that is, I have no doubt, John, that has shaped your views as much as some of your more professional and polished experiences. Because I know you just bring a heart and a passion to this for making sure that our schools are working and our colleges are working and our early childhood system is working for all kids. And that's not always the case. We got a lot of work to do, and that's even when you don't have a once in a century pandemic to contend with. So thank you for joining us. We know that you've been paying close attention around the country to what's going on. And so I'm going to turn it over to your very capable hands to walk us through what you're seeing, what's on your mind, and what we should be paying attention to as we look to build back better here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Robin, and thank you to Advance Illinois for inviting me to join you all this evening, and thanks everybody for making time for the conversation. Really what I want to do is lay sort of a shared foundation for the discussion of how we approach learning recovery. But I'll start where Robin left off in her very kind introduction, which is, to me, these issues, making sure that education works for all kids, could not be more urgent and could not be more central to what we need to do to deliver on America's promise of equality of opportunity. And I know that as a former policymaker, as an advocate, but also personally. I grew up in New York City. I was a kid of two public school educators. Both my parents passed away when I was a kid, my mom when I was 8 and my dad when I was 12. And the thing that saved me was incredible, dedicated, passionate, inspiring New York City public school teachers who made school a place that was safe and engaging and supportive. And so I think a lot during this period of COVID about kids who've been disconnected from school and how difficult that would be. And I'm quite certain if as a kid I had not had the consistency and engagement of school, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I'd be in prison or maybe not alive today. I mean, school was that important. It saved my life. I remember the things we did in 4th, 5th, 6th grade like it was yesterday, from reading the New York Times every day to doing productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream and Alice in Wonderland. School was the thing that engaged me, that allowed me to be a kid when I couldn't be a kid at home. And so when I think about the stakes of this conversation, to me, those are the stakes. Will we do all we can to make sure that school is a transformative force in the lives of our children? So with that as our framing, let's dive into just a few slides to try to frame our conversation. So look, you all know the data on the demographics of the Illinois student population, but I just want to emphasize a majority of students in the public schools are students of color. Nearly half the students are from low-income backgrounds eligible for free or reduced price lunch. If we don't, as a country or in the state of Illinois, ensure that we are educating low-income students and students of color, we have no future. Our economy and our democracy depend on that. And the truth is, we haven't been doing a good enough job. And that was true before COVID. If you look at college attainment in the state, you see at the bottom of that slide, big gaps based on race. And that is an indicator that we weren't delivering equity before COVID. The next slide looks at 4th grade reading. This is the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And if you look at the bottom part of each of those columns, that red, that's below basic. Now the goal is for students to be proficient or advanced, that's the green. And the yellow is basic, red is below basic. These are the students who are significantly behind where they need to be in order to be proficient in reading in 4th grade. And if you look for African American students, 54% were scoring in Illinois below basic in 2019. So again, the equity gaps were present before COVID. You can see it's 45% for Latino students, just 25% for white students. We weren't delivering equity before COVID. The next slide makes a similar point around 8th grade math. And you see there 51% of Black students were below basic on the NAEP in math in 2019 in the state of Illinois, and 38% of Latino students, just 22% of white students. So again, big racial gaps in achievement before COVID. Then the next slide just frames some of the challenges that COVID brought us. And we still don't know fully the long-term impact of COVID, but some things we do know. Bellwether did an analysis suggesting that we have as many as 3 million students who are disconnected from school. These are students who maybe haven't logged in since March, students who've given up on school, students who were enrolled last year but didn't show up this year, students who've had to work, for example, to support their families and so have left high school. We know that this period of online and hybrid learning has been incredibly challenging for families. Before COVID, Pew did an analysis that showed 79% of white households had reliable internet access, just 66% of Black families and 61% of Latino families. We still know that there are students around the country who don't have internet access. They aren't able to connect with their classes. This is a particular problem in high needs urban communities, but it's also particularly a problem in high needs rural communities as well. We also know we still have students who are doing their schoolwork on their mom's cell phone because they don't have a proper device for learning, even though we're a year into this period of disruption to school. All of this will have consequences for student learning. One early study projected unfinished learning for Latino students at 9 months and 10 months for Black students. More recent studies have suggested maybe as much as a year of lost learning for students of color and for low-income students. On the next slide, we talk about some of the non-academic impacts. The fact that a recent survey suggested that 40% of Black and Latino households with children are struggling to provide food for their kids. Food insecurity, huge challenge. The health impact of COVID has been disproportionately felt by communities of color. There's been a huge increase in mental health visits by young people across the country. This period of isolation from teachers, from peers, and this is true in online environments, this is true even in hybrid environments, this is even true in places where kids are going to school, but because of all the public health procedures, they're not able to participate in extracurriculars and social activities in the same way. This has been really hard on kids, and we have to think about not only addressing kids' academic needs, but their socio-emotional needs as well. We can turn to the next slide. As I said, there's been a significant impact on learning, but we don't know fully the scope. We're going to need assessments as we return to regular school to understand where kids are, not for the purpose of blaming and punishing, but for the purpose of diagnosing where the gaps are, identifying the students who need the most support, whether that's summer or next school year. We're going to need to look at that assessment data in connection with other data that we have, like chronic absenteeism. A recent study out of the city of Boston in Massachusetts showed that 40% of their 11th and 12th graders are chronically absent, right? Missing more than 10% of the school year. So we've got to take a hard look at attendance. We've got to take a hard look at class participation. Even if students are logging in at the beginning of the day, are they actually in all of their courses? So we need the assessments, but we need these other data points. An important data point is FAFSA completion, the free application for federal student aid. Students who complete the FAFSA as seniors are significantly more likely to go on to post-secondary education. And we know FAFSA completion numbers are down this year, and we're significantly down last year as well. Those are students who are missing out on billions of dollars in federal support for higher education. We can go on to the next slide. So what do we do about this? And I really want to focus our conversation on the action steps. We all understand that there is a problem. Again, teachers and principals have done extraordinary work, have worked hard to try to support kids, but online learning is not the same as in-person learning. This period of COVID has been challenging academically and socially and emotionally. So now there's a question of what we do. At EdTrust, we have a set of papers coming out actually tomorrow on this topic, and we really focus on three areas: the need for targeted intensive tutoring to address that unfinished learning, the need for more learning time, summer and after school as we move into the next school year, and the central importance of relationships, building relationships between students and positive adult mentors in their schools and communities. So I want to talk about each of those. We can move on to the next slide. The good news is money's coming. As President Biden has said, help is here. The American Rescue Plan includes significant resources to help school districts provide these supports to students. The plan includes, the new law includes $165 billion for K-12 as well as higher education. 20% of the funds allocated to K-12 are dedicated to addressing issues of learning loss and socio-emotional needs due to COVID. Now, districts can spend more than that, but at least 20% has to be for that purpose. And then there's state money to support administration of this effort, and at least 5% of that money needs to go to addressing unfinished instruction and student socio-emotional needs. There's substantial money in the American Rescue Plan to address internet access, $7.1 billion to make sure that folks have the internet and devices that they need. There's also funding in the bill to address food insecurity, an increase in the SNAP benefit, as well as extension of something called pandemic EBT, which allows families whose kids have not been in the school building to rather than having to go to the school to get meals, they can actually get a benefit card that allows them to use those dollars to purchase food. So there's a lot in this package that will be helpful. There's also the refundable child tax credit, which could cut child poverty by as much as half. So there's lots here. I want to focus on how those resources might be used by school districts to address academic and socio-emotional needs. So we can go on to the next slide. Targeted intensive tutoring. Sometimes people refer to this as high dosage tutoring. Some things that are important around design. For the tutoring to work well, and we have decades of research evidence on tutoring programs. For the tutoring to work well, it is better to have the same tutor consistently over an extended period of time. It's an important design principle. It's important that the tutor is well trained, has high quality curricular materials that they're using with the student, and that those materials allow them to design the instruction to meet the individual needs of the student that they're working with. And ideally, the tutor is working with one or two students at a time. Sometimes for logistical reasons, it might be more than that, but ideally, we'd have the tutor working with one or two students at a time. think about those design principles, and then we have to ask, are our communities positioned with the capacity to stand up tutoring at that scale? Fortunately, in the American Rescue Plan is also $1 billion to expand the AmeriCorps program, to mobilize recent college graduates, for example, through a year of service to provide these kind of tutoring opportunities. There are certainly existing programs in communities around the country that do tutoring. There are retired teachers who are eager to be of service in this kind of programming. But it's really important that districts today are thinking through how they will implement this kind of tutoring. Tennessee, I just was hearing from the Tennessee State Commissioner. Tennessee had a special legislative session just on the issue of COVID's impact on education, and they committed state resources to an intensive tutoring effort as well, including careful training of tutors around the curricula that are being used by school districts. We can go on to the next slide. We have one really good Illinois example. The University of Chicago just recently came out with a study of the SAGA education program. This is a nonprofit that partners with schools, uses AmeriCorps core members who are doing that year of national service to work directly with students on math, high school students on math. And the evidence that the University of Chicago described in this really important study was that SAGA was able to double or triple the amount of math learning for those students who received intensive tutoring. Students' grades were better. They were less likely to fail their math courses. And of course, we know failing courses is a predictor of dropping out. So we have good reason to believe that students were much better positioned to succeed in high school as a result of the successful tutoring experience through SAGA. So I commend that study to you, but I also encourage you to think about what are the strengths of that design, right? Well-trained tutors, sustained relationship over the course of the year, high quality curricular materials, individualized attention, all important elements. The next slide speaks to expanded learning time. This could be after school or summer. The reality is students have missed a lot, and intensive tutoring can help accelerate them, but many students are just going to need more time. And we should be thinking again about what's the right design to maximize the impact of that expanded learning time. We also should be thinking about coupling that expanded learning time with additional wraparound services, right? This is an opportunity, whether it's in the summer or through after school programming, to also have programs for parents to address mental health and counseling needs. So we should be thinking broadly about what this expanded time looks like. In the next slide, we talk about a study that was done of a number of programs around the country that were funded through the 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant program. Now, these programs had some important design features. So these were after school programs. Students were in small groups with a certified teacher. That teacher received preparation for the after school programming, as well as ongoing professional development, as well as coaching. Students were getting quite a bit of instruction, 45 minutes, 4 days a week during the school year, tied directly to the reading or math curriculum in which they were participating. The good news is there were real gains in math as a result of the programming. The bad news is the gains in reading were not statistically significant. So this was a big investment of resources and the modest benefits. So we really, again, have to think about design. It may be that those groups are just too large. It may be that the amount of time was not sufficient. So we got to think about that as we think about the design of programs this summer. We have good evidence that a real distinguishing feature in the effectiveness of summer school, summer programming is attendance. If kids aren't there, not surprisingly, they just don't get the benefit. And so the strongest summer programs are ones that have required attendance and are sufficiently engaging that students want to show up. So I think really, as we think about design for this summer, we shouldn't think about just straight academics, although we'll want academic work. We also should be thinking about arts, athletics, robotics, music. What are the high interest activities that we're going to do to make sure that students are engaged and wanting to be in the summer programming? We can move on to the next slide. Relationships. As I said, in my experience, school saved my life, and the thing that saved me was the learning experiences, but more than that, it was the relationships with teachers who communicated care and concern and love for me. I'm still in touch with my teacher, who was my teacher in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, Mr. Osterwile. He was like a surrogate father to me, and I'm still in touch with him. He shaped my life profoundly. That relationship was just critical. And as Robin knows, it wasn't a straight line. When I got to high school, like many kids who experience trauma at early ages, I actually got in a lot of trouble. So much trouble I got kicked out of high school. First U.S. Secretary of Education had been kicked out of school. But again, it was relationships. It was teachers and a school counselor who were willing to give me a second chance, who were willing to invest in me, who were willing to show more hope and faith in me than I had in myself, willing to see me as more than the sum of my mistakes, that helped get me back on track. So we think relationships have to be a focus of our recovery strategy, relationships in which students feel cared about, where they feel that the adults want them to grow and are challenging them to grow, are providing them with meaningful support. So we can go to the next slide. There was very promising research done on the City Year program, showing that City Year mentors working with high school students were able to help those students develop stronger socio-emotional skills, the ability to navigate the difficulties that they face, ability to communicate about their feelings, ability to see the world from other people's perspective, ability to see that you can achieve through hard work, having a growth mindset. City Year mentors help students develop those skills, and it paid off in higher academic achievement. And the more time students were spending with those City Year mentors, the better the outcomes were. So again, this is a good argument for betting on well-designed mentoring programs that could also have tutoring as a component. But we've got to be thinking now, as we think about spending this $125, $130 billion in K-12, who can be the providers, who can be the partners, how can we make these designs work with our current staff? How should this look this summer and next school year? Next slide. I don't want to suggest that tutoring and expanded learning time and relationships are all we need. We also need to continue the work on making sure that our curriculum materials are culturally responsive, that we have a diverse educator workforce, that we're addressing issues of implicit bias in schools, that we're providing really high quality evidence-based reading instruction, that we're taking on funding inequities as you've tried to do in Illinois over the last few years, that we're investing in our babies in that 0 to 4 early childhood space, that we're supporting kids around post-secondary transitions. There are no silver bullets. Tutoring, summer, strong mentoring programs, those are not silver bullets. We still have to have a comprehensive strategy. But we have a tremendous opportunity, I think, with the resources that the American Rescue Plan provides to really try to address some of the impact that COVID has had on kids and families. A final point before turning it back to Robin. I'll just say this two final points. The strategy for how to use the summer and after school can't just come down to the same folks who are in districts trying to figure out how to reopen safely and how to manage hybrid learning through the rest of this school year. You really need in each district a team that is focused, laser focused on how to use the summer, how to use after school programming, how to do the return to school in the fall. And then last point, we need to think about this recovery not just about the next 3 months or 6 months. Kids have lost a lot. This period has had a big impact on them. And we're going to need a multi-year strategy. We need to be thinking about summer 21 and summer 22 and summer 23. We've got to be thinking about what's the academic acceleration path that's going to help students make big gains next year and the following year so that they can get back to where they're supposed to be. So we've got to really think long term here. Looking forward to the rest of the conversation and the discussion.
John, thank you so much for kicking us off, for giving us that very thoughtful overview of what we're facing and what some of the promising ideas are. So I think it's important. And first of all, if you didn't already get a drink, you may want one now. But it is important. And I think the more we've got a sense of not just the scope of the issue, but that there are promising ideas that we can bring up to match it, I think the more hopeful. So we're going to bring on our panelists. I'm going to introduce them. And as I introduce you, please turn on your camera, turn on your mic. But we've got a really distinguished group. Let me start by introducing a woman who by now really doesn't need an introduction, but Dr. Carmen Ayala, State Superintendent of Education here in Illinois, who is similar to John. There's not much she hasn't done in education. She began her time as an early childhood instructor. She's worked in bilingual. She served as as an assistant superintendent, really focusing in on academics and instruction. And then I think probably one of the things that she's unbelievably proud of, in addition to being a published author, go get her book, is that she was superintendent of North Berwyn, and she managed to do what many people talk about and dream about, which is she genuinely closed achievement gaps. And she did so by very methodically and very intentionally working on a couple of critical issues and staying with them over time. So to have someone like that in a position of leadership is really an honor for the state. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ayala.
Thank you.
Also want to welcome Representative Avery Bourne. And as she mentioned in introduction, she has been a representative since I think it's 2015. She's giving an education at the home front as well. She's got young ones afoot. And so I think that trying to make sure that our education system is equipped to do its best by all students is not only something that she was interested in before she was a mom, but I suspect is renewed interest in that. She's also an attorney by training, so be careful what you say. She's sharp and capable on that front as well. And also want to welcome Senator Christopher Belt. Senator Belt, thank you so much for being with us. I think folks know that Senator Belt is from the Metro East area, proudly so, now lives in Cahokia, where he is raising his family. And has a wonderful mix of, I bet there's a few things that you don't know about him. I'm introducing people, there's all this stuff you know about him. You know he probably came from a background in law enforcement. You may or may not know he was a school board president for a number of years. For those of you who have served on school boards, as I have as well, it is truly the definition of a thankless task. Incredibly important, lots of long hours, lots of public-facing accountability for anything that doesn't go quite the way people with lots of opinions might have it to be. So appreciate your service there. But what you also may not know is that Senator Belt is incredibly interested, dedicated to youth development, youth leadership. Don't forget to turn your camera back on, Senator Belt. He has also published a book, a children's book, if I'm correct. Nathan, am I correct? Did I get that right? So lots of things for you guys to go out and do some follow-up reading on. So we have lots of things to unpack here, and I want to start first. We're gonna be able to get into sort of what next, but I just sort of want to set the scene. You guys have just heard the picture that Secretary King has painted about the circumstances that we face, and I am just wondering, and I want to start first, Senator Belt and Representative Bourne, with the two of you. What are you hearing in your neck of the woods? You guys are from Central and Southern Illinois. I know we paid attention to some of the the equity issues that we entered this pandemic with that fall along lines of race and income, but clearly in Illinois, they also fall along lines of geography, among other things. So I'm curious what you're hearing. And Senator Butt, why don't I start with you? What are you hearing in your neck of the woods? And then I'm going to kick it to you, Representative.
In my neck of the woods, I'm hearing a lot of the things that Dr. King, John King spoke of. As he stated, and as you've pointed out, pre-COVID, there was this deficiency and discrepancy, and COVID has seemed to expose and widen those gaps bigger. And so things that I'm hearing of, it's exacerbated the trauma of our kids. In my district, if you were to Google the top 10 poor cities in Illinois, 3 of them would be in the 57th district: East St. Louis, Centerville, and Brooklyn. I don't think no other Senate district has that type of distinction. Along with that, though, comes the trauma, abject poverty, which is trauma in and of itself, and all the things that we discovered and that were revealed during COVID, technology divide, just a whole host of issues that we have to deal with, that we were trying to deal with before COVID, and now they're just really, really heavy. They're really, really burdensome as we go through COVID. And so the challenge ahead is, how do we shorten that gap and gain up those loss in recoveries? And then what do we do long term? So those are the things that we're looking at.
All right, and I'm going to get back to that. Representative Bourne, what are you hearing from folks?
Thank you. I have the privilege of representing some very rural districts. And when this began, certainly the digital divide has impacted the state pretty tremendously, but particularly in rural areas. I was actually concerned my internet connection might not be good enough this evening. So we still have those challenges. We have seen schools get really creative, though. I mean, we can talk a lot about how this has challenged students and schools and teachers, and it certainly has. But we have seen the ingenuity of teachers and educators and of students and parents who are determined to get their kids the education that they want them to have and that they deserve. So it's not all, there are certainly a lot of challenges, but I've also heard some really good stories. And that's what I ask for too, is how can we take what we've learned and build on that? We've seen, I just had a meeting last week, and some of the schools who have been in I might be taking some of ISB's good news, but some of the schools that are in the competency-based pilot were able to transition really quickly and have been able to use those, the creative things they were already doing and help educate students better. So there is some good news. We will certainly learn from this creativity of educators, but the digital divide has been, the devices and the internet connection has been a huge challenge in rural Illinois.
I want to remind folks to use the Q&A. I'm starting to see some questions come in. I'm going to, I promised I will start splicing those in. So please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A. Dr. Ayala, as you listened to John talk about some of the sort of high impact, high leverage ideas, which of those are top of mind? I know you were starting to give thought, and it's hard, right? We're still in the middle of the immediate response. And so it's difficult to both deal with that and all that comes with it, as well as looking over the horizon. But I know you're doing just that. Which of those were resonating? Where do you think we're particularly well suited? And talk a little bit about what was speaking to you.
Thank you, Robin. A lot of what Dr. King was indicating was resonating with some of the work that we have been doing as of late. Our focus is on resuming in-person instruction so that we can increase the quality of instruction and rebuild those relationships between students and teachers. It's so critical. Our children need to be in our schools. We just released the new joint guidance with the Illinois Department of Public Health to support the return for in-person instruction as soon as practicable in each community. And we know that the guidance is rooted in science. The data show that schools themselves are not significant spreaders of the virus. The next round of federal COVID-19 relief funding is also top of mind for us, and we're encouraging our school districts to direct those funds toward adding instructional time for students, such as through summer school, before and after school, Saturday school, and certainly the digital divide is something that we really put a focus on with the first round of funding, and we will continue to work on doing everything that we can to close that divide.
So I want to ask a follow-up question too of you, John. One of the ideas, and it picks up, Carmen, with your point, trying to expand time, trying to use our summers more effectively, trying to bring tutors in, things that we can wrap our arms around. Before we get into sort of the long-term possibilities there, let's unpack a few of the short-term issues, and I'm getting some of these in the question and answer as well. We've got very tired teachers, so that's number one. So as we think about using summertime, what's the right way to think about that? And then in addition, I really appreciate your mentioning AmeriCorps. I think that is a potentially really significant undertaking, but can we use that? Can we tap into teacher candidates? Like, unpack that just one more, how do we make it work in a tired, beleaguered, overwhelmed state? Those are not simple switches to flip.
No, I think that's right. And I'm very worried about that. So I do think we need force multipliers. And so a couple examples. Last summer, former Governor Haslam of Tennessee launched something called Tennessee Tutoring Corps. And what Governor Haslam did was partner with colleges and universities to match students with elementary school students to serve as tutors. Tennessee, in that special legislative session I just mentioned, now has committed state funds basically to scaling up that idea. They're going to partner with higher ed institutions and teacher preparation programs in particular to try to get those students at the undergraduate and graduate level into summer classrooms to provide support for students. But the key will be training, right? And identifying good partners to help ensure that those young people are well prepared to teach reading skills, to teach math skills. They'll need good curricular materials to execute on that. And actually in Tennessee, the state is developing some kind of baseline curricular materials that could be used during the summer period based on what they think are the highest leverage standards for each grade. So they're providing districts with kind of a default summer curriculum that they could use. Now, not every state is positioned to do that, and states have different levels of resources, but I think there is an opportunity here for the state to help support districts in planning and executing on those high quality summer experiences. We can also think about retired teachers as another pool of folks who might be available for the summer. And we should also think about traditional summer partners. Summer doesn't have to be just summer school. We should also be thinking about arts programs and music programs, and we should be thinking about our community colleges. Last summer, Northern Virginia Community College offered 5 free online college courses to any high school junior or senior in their region of Northern Virginia. And they paid for it with CARES Act dollars. And they now have all these students who got a dual enrollment experience they otherwise wouldn't have had. So that was a great innovation, was mobilizing community colleges as partners.
We're getting some interesting sort of creative questions in the chat as well. And this is maybe for Dr. Ayala and Representative Bourne and Senator Belt, is just, are there some creative ways that we can reduce tuition for teacher candidates or others if those folks swing in to help in the summer, if they're willing to work as a tutoring corps? This may be a place where the state can lean in, sort of to John's point. How doable is it going to be? What's it going to take for us to come together and actually wrestle through some of those opportunities? Dr. Allen, maybe you first.
I think, Robin, one of the key things is to really continue to work on the networks and the collaboration. That is something that we have been working very much on, especially during this pandemic. lots of partnerships with institutions of higher ed. We meet regularly with our higher ed counterparts, leaders, and we talk about some of these things. We have great partnerships with our regional offices of education, who are the extended arms of the agency. And I think we need to do more and more of that, and really create just ways that we can leverage each other's resources, each other's programs, each other's opportunities that are available to really create something that could support our children.
Senator Bell, we've got a question here. There are a number of questions about social and emotional supports. That I think the concerns about mental health and wellness for students and teachers and families more broadly is top of mind. So we've got one question for the area, and this is speaking to, I think, an issue. Over 100 suicide assessment calls were made for students in 2020 alone in District 189. So the question is, how do we make sure that we're getting the resources that we need to address the crises that have been exacerbated by COVID-19 in terms of the mental health and the trauma? Any thoughts on that? And it really is, this is a statewide, just heartbreaking.
This is really an issue that we have to prioritize. I spoke earlier about mental health. Robin, when you have in those underserved communities that I outlined before, when you have trauma and traumatic experiences, and then you have something like COVID comes along, and in the sense of these communities where you may have like the grandma that is the stable force in the family, and she's the rock, and then all of a sudden COVID comes along, and as we know, it disproportionately impacted people of color, Black and brown, and grandma is no longer there. What happens to that familiar structure, right? That's the only person that has been a constant throughout, and as we've seen in those communities, East St. Louis, Centerville, and those underserved communities throughout the country, when you lose that guiding force, that force that I was going to school for, even when I didn't believe in myself, I went to school for her to make her proud. When those things are gone, you're already dealing with trauma. As I stated before, poverty in and of itself, abject poverty in and of itself is traumatic. Then you lose the only thing that you've ever cared about. That's gone. And so the suicide calls, the increase in the isolation, the lack of food, there's a lot of things that pour into those situations. And so to answer your question though, what do we need to do? There has to be a priority for state elected officials, right? We have to lead the charge. As the chairman for education Senate K through 12, I have to lead the charge in that area to say, hey, we got to get resources and services to those communities, to those students, to those babies, to those families, because we understand you do not deal with children in a vacuum. You deal with the whole unit. And so I'm happy to that Representative Greenwood, my representative, fought hard and long to get a trauma resource center in East St. Louis. That's going to be tremendous. And so that's how we'll start fighting those issues that you spoke of in this question.
So two questions. I want to bring in, John and Avery, both of you with slightly different point. I think this issue of social and emotional support and how do we respond to trauma, we're talking about it more in the short term. And by short, I really mean 3 months to 3 years, right? This is, short term isn't just this summer and or I think even next year. One of the questions in the chat is, boy, if we add more time, is that actually going to be more traumatizing for students? And would love for you, John, to unpack that a little bit. I don't think that was your intent. Would love for you to explain that. And then Representative Bourne would really be interested to take the next step, which is, as we try to respond to immediate needs, what are the things where you're starting to think from a legislative point of view, like where, to Senator Bell's point, where are there longer term changes that we need to start pushing on? That the degree of student support that we've been willing to accept both because we don't fund it adequately and because we don't require it, has really been inadequate. And what do we need to start doing? So John, to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing here is to think about how isolating this year has been for so many kids, especially our most vulnerable students. Kids who are in homes where there's trauma, whether it's a parent who is addicted to substances, or a home where there's physical abuse. Think about kids who are home alone. We have a lot of students who have been home by themselves or maybe with an older sibling for months. The analysis suggests that only about 1 in 5 African Americans in the workforce can work from home. Only about 1 in 6 Latinos in the workforce can work from home. So while some kids have had their parents sitting next to them while they've been at their computer, other kids have been on their own or working even. And so to me, the idea around summer isn't to just have students doing the academic work. It's really about reconnecting them with a community of peers and teachers with which to engage, which is why for me, I'm interested not just in reading and math. I'm interested in how do we have summer experiences that get students doing theater productions? How do we have summer experiences that get students exploring the outdoors? How do we have students there's a writing program that in Boston that the way they get students writing is they take them on field trips all around the city and they write about their experience in the Museum of Fine Arts and in the Children's Museum and in the aquarium, and they have writing prompts that are about those experiences, right? So we should be thinking creatively about how to make the summer a time of relationships and support. We also have to remember that for many kids, school is the place where they get food. For many families, school is the place where kids get access to counselors and mental health services, particularly in some communities where there may be stigma around mental health services. You may not go elsewhere for those mental health services, but if they're happening at school and it's part of the school program, that may make you more comfortable. And so we should be thinking about, again, this is an opportunity to re-engage kids with school.
I appreciate that. When we hear time, I think people just immediately picture, sort of seats and desks. And I think you are rightly, asking us to think more creatively, as we should generally, which sort of leads to these sort of, there's a longer term. I think if I've heard a lot of themes over the last, a lot of listening over the last, year. And one of them is we don't want to go back to normal. We want to learn lessons, and we want to use this moment not only to meet current needs and rise to that level, but to do things better going forward. So Representative Warren, as you're listening, like what, particularly around student wellness and social and emotional, what are some of the things that you think maybe we can push ourselves on as a state?
Yeah, and just to Senator Belt's previous point, we have taken this on. We haven't taken on the resource side of legislating, right? We haven't done the budget stuff yet, but we have been changing some policies around student mental health. I know we've passed 3 bills through the committee just last week to help teachers identify students that they may need to reach out to who they may be concerned or suicidal. We've passed a bill out of the House to allow for sick days to include mental health days. We're getting at small policies that can help be a part of this bigger picture, which I think reframes the debate about what we're thinking. And it's been totally bipartisan, right? This isn't something that one person's pushing. There is a broad recognition across the state that this has been a huge challenge for students' mental health and social and emotional well-being. And so I think the resource discussion absolutely has to be a part of our conversation, especially as we allocate these federal dollars. And it's also why I'm a big believer in the model that we've worked on for years. And I see some fellow professional review panel members in the audience. But when we drive resources to the schools that need it most, they're able to invest in having more counselors. They're able to invest in having these resources that they may just be skimming by with the bare minimum of having a teacher in the classroom, where a lot of these more at-risk districts, right, have not been able to invest in the resources that they need. And this has exacerbated that, right? I think a lot of these schools see the needs that they have. And we have an opportunity from the state, I think, to send federal dollars to these schools who need it the most.
So, first want to, I put this in the written chat. One of the questions that came in is, I'm gonna come back to the resource question. You can bet your Bippy that we're gonna get back to the budget in just a minute. But one of the questions in the chat was, our federal dollars going to be distributed in a way that really speaks to need? And just for anybody who's not aware on the call, that the numbers are going, the money that goes out to schools and districts is being given out according to Title I poverty formulas. So it will in fact, well, not entirely perfectly, but it will in fact be following student needs. So hopefully that is reassuring. I want to ask a follow-up question on, there are several questions in the chat about re-engaging students. We didn't really go into the numbers, but students have been lost. Enrollment is down generally and pretty significantly in elementary school, and particularly in the earliest grades, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, in the double digits. Elementary school generally very high, but also in higher education, where we've really had a lot of students stop out. And I think there's going to be an ongoing concern. If you're a graduating senior this year or next year, and you were unsure, do I belong in post-secondary, you probably feel that much less well prepared, that much more wobbly as you're trying to make this. So I'm going to ask you, John, first, and then you, Carmen, to speak to what are some strategies that we need to really be putting our, not only at the local level, we're a big local control state, right, with our local available dollars, universities and districts, but also at the state level, to really deliberately try to re-engage students who we either lost completely or really not as engaged as they typically would be at all levels, including higher education.
Yeah. So 3 things I think about. One is we have to be dogged about finding every student. I think about the Phoenix Union School District in Arizona that last spring had a Every Student Every Day campaign, where someone in the school district, an adult in the school district, was in touch with every child in the district every day to check on them. Did they have internet? Did they have a device? Did they need food? Did they have a mental health need that needed to be addressed? And then they kind of rolled up information to the central office so that the district could support kids and families. There are districts that are hiring outreach counselors to go and reconnect with families and make sure they're connected with school. So that's one. 2, we need to have a bridge back to school. So one way to think about the summer programming, maybe it's starting a couple weeks early with 9th graders. I have a 9th grader at home. She's never been in her high school as a student. She's in class with kids and teachers she's never met in the physical world, right? So, could we start a couple weeks early with those transition years, 9th graders, 6th graders, if that's the entry year for middle school, to try to have a little more time with those students to get them reoriented to the routines of school. Same with higher ed. Could we have a bridge program for the students who maybe were supposed to enroll this past fall, didn't? Let's go find them. Let's encourage them to come back to higher ed for next fall semester, but let's start them a little bit early in August, get them oriented, get them a head start on their courses, so forth. The third piece is, for some of the students who are disengaged, this is not just about school or even internet access. This is about challenges in their lives outside of school, like maybe they had to work because of the financial situation of their family, or maybe they were never that engaged in school before COVID and didn't see how school is relevant to their lives. So thinking about different school design models, partnerships with work and school for some of our high school and college students so they can earn money while they're finishing school, thinking about programs that embed much more intensive mental health supports where kids have experienced significant trauma. We may have to think differently about how we organize our schools, but that will be a lot better investment than the consequences of a lost generation of students.
Carmen, what would you add?
I think Dr. King covered a couple of items that we're actually going to be focusing on. This idea of transitions and lost transitions, because those critical, preschool to kindergarten, elementary to middle school, middle school to high school to higher ed. Those are critical transition points. We are having a kindergartner and early childhood campaign. Kindergarten was the grade that had the greatest decline in enrollment. And so this means that our youngest children will be coming to school next year with a more even array of early childhood experiences. And so this notion of a jumpstart kindergarten program, as Dr. Keene mentioned, having a few weeks before school officially ends, just to introduce the children, build those relationships, and help with that transition. Those are things that we are discussing and that we are looking at allocating the additional funding that we have as a state agency set aside to help support schools more with. And then on the other end, with our high school to secondary, we're already having conversations on what kinds of transitions and partnerships can we support so that we can have grants available to help support the innovative needs that each community is going to have for really supporting our high school students. The reality is that many of our high school students, our Black and Brown, our low income, have had to work. They've had to go to work to help support their families. And so how do we help through that transition while things get back to a new normal, if you will? We may want to rethink how we deliver instruction to these students that also have to go to work. I remember back in the day, we had an evening high school. So kids can go to work if they needed to support their families, but they were given options of they could take these classes at this time and these classes in the evening. And so we accommodated the needs of the students. And so we have to think more in terms of the situations that our students and families are living with and how we can accommodate, not trying to have them accommodate to the system that we have. And that's a different kind of mindset and way of thinking, but I think that's an equity mindset.
So one of the things that I do want to touch on, there are a couple big topics I want to get to before we lose our time. Senator Belt, Representative Bourne, and you've already mentioned this. Obviously, there has been, the good news is there are more federal resources, than I think some of us hoped might be possible, and that's huge. And what that will enable our higher ed institutions and our childcare providers and our K-12 system to do by way of immediate response and recovery is significant. But it doesn't substitute. I think there's a real fear among many of us that the view is, well, there's money coming from the Fed, so we don't need to worry about state contribution. When the truth is, those are very different purposes. There's very different things that those dollars get used for. And Representative Bourne, you were speaking to that. You can't make the structural changes in the student support system at schools, at universities with short-term federal dollars. Can't do it, it wouldn't be responsible, and folks won't. So if we're serious about the longer term, we really need to. Now, we flat funded the evidence-based formula last year in most of education funding. There's a call for a few increases around MAP grants, which is great in this year where affordability is going to matter. What can you guys say to the 200 folks who are listening about our ability to, in fact, make some education investments that districts, that colleges, that childcare providers can actually use going forward? How possible is that going to be in a really challenging budget year? Senator Belt, why don't we start with you? I know everybody wants to tackle that, but I'll let you go first.
Thank you. In this environment, with the budget being the way that it is after a once in a lifetime pandemic, we do have challenges. I am encouraged with the correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking it's $5 billion that will be given to the state of Illinois with the federal funds. And so as you alluded to, Robin, it's what we have to do is really make sure that we prioritize those funds. I think we could, and I'm just speaking from what I would want to see, that we use those funds. We put the $350 million into education, the EBF dollars. That way we're not giving it a flat fund, for lack of a better word, flat funding. Again, this go round. What those dollars should be focused on. We should really invest in our kids. We should really look at long-term solutions for those dollars. We know that one of the things that the pandemic did, it really changed the model and the mindset of education, what we could do, how we can do it. And so we know technology now is a part of education. We really need to put dollars towards education. I mean, the digital divide. We need to put dollars toward bandwidth because those things are here now. They're not going anywhere, right? That's going to be part of the new paradigm, the shift. And Dr. King spoke to earlier, we need to really look at high dosage tutoring. We have to, it's about relationships. In the slide that he presented earlier, it's about relationships. It's about leveraging those relationships. It's about bringing professional tutors in, staying with those kids. And I would dare say, even do it within instructional time. Because my fear is once those kids go home, it's hard to get them back. And if we can do it within the confines of the school during instructional periods, I think we'll have a better shot. And so what does that look like with those funds? It's got to be scaled down, obviously, but we should be able to use those dollars to bring tutors in, professional tutors in. So you got the technological divide, the digital divide, you got the professional tutors, particularly in all subjects, but math and English and writing and spelling and all those things that we're going to need going forward. So I think we need to prioritize those. I feel really, I feel better that $5 billion is coming to the state of Illinois. Had we had this forum a month ago, I wouldn't have known how to answer that, but I feel a little better with that now.
All right, well, I'm glad you're encouraged. We are too, but Representative Bourne, we're still going to be, despite those federal dollars, committed to getting state funding into evidence-based formula and to hire. What do you think? What are our chances of doing that?
I am cautiously optimistic for a few reasons. One, I think we've heard under the previous administration, the governor presents a budget and then the legislature makes the budget. That's how the process worked the last time. That's how it works this time. And we've heard from members on the House Education Appropriations Committee that education funding to the model is a priority. I think from our caucus specifically, funding pensions and EBF are top two priorities. And then we'll see what money is left because we have to fund our kids. And I'm really encouraged by getting money to local school districts to make these decisions for what they need most, right? We can try to make statewide programs, but if we give schools the tools that they need, they know how to fund it or how to spend that funding for their students who need it most. They know the needs that they have. They know if they need a counselor, they know if they need to hire tutors, they know if they need to invest it in another teacher, they know. So I'm encouraged that I think there is a lot of will, at least in the House, to fund EBF. And also I think that that's the right model for getting resources to our schools because I trust that those teachers and parents and educators and the school board will make the best decision for their local students.
So my final question, which I fear will take us up to the end, I don't know, but for each of the four of you, but I'm going to start with you, John. This is a lot. This is a huge moment in time with enormous stakes attached, not only the future of our students and their families, but also our communities and our state as a whole, and our country clearly, though we're going to focus on Illinois. And there is a lot of support and resources coming from the feds. Our hope is that the state will continue to step up, make some additional investments where they need to. What do we want to be able to say? How do we hold ourselves responsible? What should we be looking for? If we did our job right, if we did right by our kids, if we really did rise to this very challenging moment, what should we be able to say a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? What should we be paying attention to as the bellwether of whether we got it right or not?
Wow, it's a big question. So I would say that we need to see progress over the next year towards reversing the slide that we're on. So right now, what we know is that students are worse off in terms of reading and writing skills, math skills, college enrollment. Community college enrollment is down nationally, double digits for first-time students. So we're going in the wrong direction. A year from now, those numbers should be headed in the opposite direction. We should see students making better than a year's progress in math and reading. We should see enrollment ticking back up in public higher ed. We should see FAFSA completion back up over our pre-COVID numbers. Those would be good signs that we're moving in the right direction. But I think our aspiration has to be bigger. It really has to be about changing the underlying system, because as Senator Bell emphasized, these were problems before COVID. So getting back to February 2020, from my perspective, would not be victory. That would be a failure. If all we do is get back to February 2020, that is just not good enough. We actually have to have a higher aspiration, which to my mind is this COVID generation of students has to be prepared to succeed in college, in careers, and as citizens, right? And we weren't doing that before. We were not equitably delivering on that promise for all of our kids before COVID. But let this be the moment where we, as a country, reoriented our priorities and our investments and organized ourselves to ensure that every student would graduate from high school ready to succeed in college and careers and ready to participate in strengthening our democracy.
I mean, it could be this incredible moment, right, where we really wrap our arms around kids in a way that usually for resource reasons in the main, we can't, where there is intensive tutoring for everybody who needs it. There is rich, stimulating summer programming. How to make sure it's all rich and stimulating and not more rote is a challenge, but that there's rich, stimulating summer programming. That there's counseling available year round. It's not just on a 9 or 10 month cycle as if summers, there's no transition issues, that we really do, we mind those transitions much more fully, that we really prepare our teachers for the kind of social and emotional issues. And then we see a bump, and then we recommit ourselves to what it really takes, both at the federal level and the state level. This could be something we look back on and are actually glad shook us out of our lassitude. But so I appreciate that. And Carmen, what should we be watching to? How do we know if we not only did right by our kids, but maybe to the point that John's raising, that we actually started to grow in terms of what we expect from ourselves systemically?
I think that one of the things that this pandemic has done, as well as the events that we have been experiencing across this country, have really shed a magnifying glass on inequities, on systemic things that we really need to start addressing. It has really pulled the soul of education in this country, has been opened, has been revealed, and needs the renewal and the healing. And so for me, it's about how much inequity exists, and I'll focus on the state of Illinois. We hear all these stories about teachers delivering meals to students and finding the mom who's trying to feed a family of 5 with 1 loaf of bread, or that the family doesn't have any running water, and we try to work towards those things. But inequities are not just statistics, they're people. And that's what we have to remind ourselves. They're people. When we're in front of our children, do we see a future lawyer, doctor, astronaut, president, no matter what background they may come with? And so I mentioned this quote, I use it frequently, that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. We need to take a look at our systems. Our classrooms alone can't do it. Our schools alone can't do it. Our districts alone can't do it. And so we need some systemic supports and structures that will assist in this journey that we're on. And so if we really intend for every single child in Illinois to be able to learn, to grow, to pursue their fullest dreams and their potential, we need to reimagine the systems that created these inequities in the first place. So I would like to see, when we're beyond the pandemic, when we're beyond, you know, some of the things that we're addressing now, that we have closed achievement gaps, that we have closed opportunity gaps, that we have closed food insecurities and all of those things that this pandemic has really magnified. I think that to me would be success.
Representative Bourne, what are you gonna be watching for to know whether we got it right and whether we should feel good and proud of how we handled our students and our families?
Yeah, it's really, thank you for making me go after that. That was such a beautiful way of talking about the opportunities that our students deserve. I think from the legislative side, it's whether we're keeping up our end of the bargain. I trust that there are great educators and great education advocates and parents and students who are working really hard on this. And I don't pretend that the legislature is going to fix this problem, but we have to hold up our end of the bargain to give the schools the resources and the flexibilities and the policies that they need to do that. And so that would be kind of my my scope of what's succeeding is, are we holding up our end of the bargain as a state and as the legislature? Because I think I've shared this before. I went to a high school that closed and my dad said, you better get involved if you don't like it. And I looked and it was state funding. That was when proration was happening and schools were forced to cut things. And so we have to hold up our end of the bargain to allow students to have the opportunities and the education that they deserve.
I really appreciate that. And this is going to be an all hands on deck. All right, Senator Belt, I'm gonna hold you to 48 seconds. What should we be watching for? What are you going to be paying attention to know whether we met this moment the way it needed to be met?
My mom also, when she was alive, would say the prettiest flowers grow after the storm. So the things that I'm looking for is, are we going to hit what Article 10, Section 1 of the state constitution in education says? The fundamental goal of the people of the state is the education development of all persons to the limits of their capacity. The state shall provide for an efficient system of high quality public education institutions and services. And then it says education in public school through secondary level should be free. And so quality, efficient, effective, free. Zip code shouldn't matter, property tax shouldn't matter. It should be about giving kids the opportunities to learn up to their limits of their capacity. It's in the words matter. And so that's what I'm looking for.
You guys have laid out some very ambitious, which I love. I think this moment really requires that. So it's not just sort of some of the metrics and dashboards, it's some of the bigger picture systems that we're going to change. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you so very, very much for taking your time, sharing your thoughts. I think you put some really good ideas, practical ideas in our head, as well as sort of loftier, longer term change. So thank you very much. John King, Carmen Ayala, Avery Bourne, Christopher Belt, really appreciate it.